And those voices have been effectively shut out within American society. The Democratic Party will use the rhetoric, but that, of course, serves the interests of the corporate state. And I think the anger towards the liberal class in this country is not misplaced. The liberal class, and Clinton did it through NAFTA, betrayed the working class in this country. They thrust a knife into the back of the American working class. And so you have within the right wing, and we're now watching the rise of the lunatic fringe of the right wing enter the mainstream, figures like Rick Perry or Michelle Bachmann. They not only have a legitimate anger towards the liberal class, which speaks in this feel-your-pain language while serving corporate interests, but because they recognize that hypocrisy, they disdain traditional liberal values, and they want to destroy them. So I think that the longer we place our faith in Obama or the Democratic Party, the more we actually empower the very forces that are arrayed against us. And that it's extremely important for, as people are here today, to begin to speak in a language of justice and truth, which I think cuts across ideological lines. I mean, it's not accidental that Ron Paul in this ridiculous straw poll in Iowa came in second. Now, the major media ignored it because it doesn't fit their narrative. But I think even within the right wing, and certainly among the libertarians within the spectrum of politics, there is an anger at corporatism that you find among anarchists. And of course it should, because it is a system built on deep inequity, deep injustice that breed corruption and fraud, which affects 99% of the American population. So I think if we stick to those issues and we understand that acts of violence is exactly how the state wants us to react. They know what to do with that. They don't really know what to do with this.
You could be here all day, honestly. Everyone loves you right now. All right, here's another one. What would you suggest as the top 10 things that need to be dismantled to ensure that change can happen? For example, capital politics, donations, that sort of thing. Also, the Tea Party.
The Tea Party isn't the problem. The Tea Party is a tool of the Koch brothers and others who have, like all sort of proto-fascist movement, effectively channeled or deflected this rage against the vulnerable, the weak. And that's what fascist movements do. The problem are corporations and unregulated capitalism. Unregulated capitalism, as Karl Marx understood, is a revolutionary force because it commodifies everything. And if we don't destroy the corporate structure, then we're finished. That's where all of our energy should be placed. Corporate capitalism is supranational in a sense that it has no loyalty to any nation state. It seeks to inflict a kind of worldwide serfdom so that you tell American workers that they should be competitive. Well, competitive with who? With sweatshop labor in Vietnam, prison labor in China. That's the real message. And that's what they're doing. And all energy has to be focused against corporations, which have seized control of our economic and political systems and our educational systems. I mean, that's what charter schools and the destruction of teacher unions are about. It's about imposing rote learning where people are taught what to think, not how to think. And the tentacles of corporatism have now reached so far and so deep into our society that the only hope is to have them rooted out.
What do you think about big companies sending American jobs overseas?
Well, what they want to do is break the back of the working class so that it's reduced to a level where they will accept the conditions of sort of slave labor overseas. I mean, NAFTA literally in some plants in Ohio were dismantled and shipped over the border, reassembled in Mexico. Well, now they're being packed up and sent to China for the sort of China's totalitarian capitalism, especially in the South, where sometimes workers are not even paid wages. So you have the destruction of an American working force. When workers in Mexico get sort of 90 cents an hour, they pack up and leave and go to China where they get 40 or 30 cents an hour. There's this kind of race to the bottom is global. And we have to begin to make war against the corporate forces that are making war against us, because that's their goal. As a matter of fact, they've gone a long way to achieving that goal.
Chris, what do you think about the use of the General Assembly for organizing?
What you don't want is to replicate a structure where everything depends on a particular leader. I mean, the Wobblies had it right. There's a great story. There was a strike in San Francisco, and so the Wobblies sent a bunch of supporters on my ship down to the docks. When they got off the ship, the San Francisco police were there to beat the crap out of them, and they kept whacking everybody with a club saying, "Where's your leader? Where's your leader?" And the Wobblies said, "We're all leaders." It's a frustrating process, but I think that if you're trying to build a movement, it's pretty
Greed,
essential.
corruption,
It makes it
fraud,
harder to
deception,
navigate.
manhandle the
Inevitably, you're
99%
going to
of
have
us.
figures as the Wobblies did,
The
Joe
federal
Hill,
bank
Big
is
Bill
what runs
Haywood,
the country.
Martin Luther King, and the Civil
Corporations
Rights
run the
Movement.
world.
People who become sort of
Bilderberg and
the
the
public
Trilateral
face of the
literally
movement.
control us
But you
in a
want to be very, very
worldwide
careful
serfdom.
that you don't
They
replicate
control our
the
seeds and our
hierarchical
farmers.
structure
They control
of the
what we
forces
see
that
on
oppose you
TV
because it
from
makes your
all
movement weak.
sides. It's
So
all a
however
stage.
frustrating
Realize the
and even
grandmaster
anarchic and
puppeteers. Cut your
chaotic
strings.
such
Save the
assemblies
poorly
can
funded
be,
educational system. Those
I
victim
think
of
in
it who
fact,
cannot realize
over the
its
long
truth.
term, they give the movement a kind of health and longevity, which is important.
By the way, since you've been watching, we got over more than 1,000 people. We're up at 6,500. Alright, another one. How do we move away from capitalism?
Well, globalization is imploding. It's destroying itself. I mean, what we're watching in the Middle East and countries like Ivory Coast and others is the breakdown of globalization. It's a dead system. It's dying. And the systems managers of globalization and corporate capitalism know only how to serve that system. I mean, Lawrence Summers is a perfect example of a figure. He is, as Treasury Secretary for Clinton, he deregulates the banking system, which leads to the banking collapse. And then he's brought back into the White House with Geithner. I mean, all these sort of tools from Goldman Sachs and Wall Street, they're brought back in to ostensibly fix the mess they saw. They don't know how to do anything else. They know only how to serve a dead system, so that when Wall Street implodes and $40 trillion in worldwide wealth evaporates, what do? They loot the U.S. Treasury to bail Wall Street out, and now, a few blocks from where I'm sitting, Wall Street is engaged in precisely the same games that it played in 2008, which will lead to precisely the same mess. Will they be able to suck us dry again? I mean, given the coterie of advisors around Obama, I wouldn't be surprised if they did. They're not trained to challenge or question structures and assumptions. They're only trained to serve that system and keep it alive. But it's very clear that the system is dying because it's unsustainable. And we have to begin to prepare. It's why access to local food is becoming extremely important. I mean, we already have food deserts in urban areas, and even where I've been working in southern West Virginia, people have to drive over an hour to the supermarket because poor people can't afford tomatoes trucked in from California or from Florida. And so we have to begin to, as much as we can, build alternative systems that allow for self-sufficiency, because as things deteriorate, the corporate state isn't going to take care of us. The only thing they're going to do is try and control us.
I have a question. You suggest any books that they should read? Your books?
Yeah. Democracy Incorporated by Sheldon Wolin, which he's probably our greatest living political philosopher. It's a book about the system we live under, which he describes as inverted totalitarianism. By that he means it's not classical totalitarianism. It doesn't find its expression through a demagogue or a charismatic leader, but through the anonymity of the corporate state. That in classical totalitarian regimes you have a reactionary or a revolutionary force that seizes power and changes the iconography and language and structure of the state. In corporate totalitarianism or inverted totalitarianism, they pay fealty to the constitutional electoral politics and patriotism, and yet have so corrupted the levers of power as to render the citizenry impotent. And I think he's right. I mean, I talked to Wolin recently, not too long ago, and he said that the primary mechanisms of political control are credit, access to credit, and cheap manufactured goods. And the credit's dried up, and the goods aren't so cheap anymore. So I asked Wolin if those two mechanisms of control are removed, people can't get credit, and suddenly life becomes prohibitively expensive. And for the 47 million Americans who live in poverty, they're now spending about 35% of their income on food. Could it flip into a more something that resembled classical totalitarianism? And he said, yeah, he thought that was a real possibility. So that book is important to me. Another book written in 1944 by Carl Polanyi, The Great Transformation, which is a study of unfettered capitalism, what happens when you have unregulated capitalism, which Polanyi argues correctly has ultimately a self-destructive force, a self-devouring force. That's a very smart book. Chomsky, anything Chomsky writes.
Anything he writes?
Yeah, I like Noam a lot. I mean, on the Middle East, Ilan Pappé, Norman Finkelstein. I read a lot of the books in the 50s, C. Wright Mills, Reisman, The Lonely Crowd. It's interesting, these 50s intellectuals, first of all, they write to be read, unlike most academics, or impenetrable. But secondly, most of them were older when they wrote these books. I think they sort of remembered what had been destroyed, what we've lost. I mean, we talk about American culture. It's not American culture, it's corporate culture. These values of hedonism and the cult of the self and consumption, these were not always part of American values. I mean, certainly there was a segment of the society that embraced thrift and self-effacement and self-sacrifice. And corporate culture, especially after World War I, worked very hard to destroy that quite effectively. There's a lot of good. I like Wendell Berry stuff. Bill McKibben's great, a great friend of mine. Ralph Nader, who I worked for in 2008, that wrote a lot of his policy speeches. He's a great friend. So they're out there. I mean, the books are out there. And I try and address a lot of these issues. I mean, certainly what happened to the left. The last book I wrote, Death of the Liberal Class, was An Empire of Illusion, which just touches on all the illusions. But they're out there, but we're very marginal. I mean, I can get on the New York Times bestseller list by selling 45,000 copies of a book, but what percentage of the American public is that? It's, I was an English major, but it was less than what percentage of 1%. So the fact is that those people have a kind of consciousness, are certainly on the margins, but that's all right. I mean, I think all great movements in history never began by appealing to the masses necessarily, but by protecting sophisticated and thoughtful analysis and real ideas, and in fact the power of those ideas crept outward. And I think the history of ideas supports that. So I don't think we should dumb ourselves down. I think that's a mistake. I think that we should not be afraid to be thoughtful. And if that alienates people, I think as the physical and economic situation deteriorates, at least for some people who are not seduced into these very frightening right-wing movements, it will prod them to begin to ask the kinds of questions that maybe they're not asking now.